Good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for having given me this opportunity to be part of this meeting, and also having arranged and organized, coordinated it very well, especially Dr. Jaya and Shankar sir, and the sponsors who have made this platform available for all of us. I'm sure all of you would have enjoyed the sessions of our senior teachers before me. I would be detailing on flow cytometry with respect to WBC disorders. This technique is currently not available to all of us, but I'm sure that in the coming years it's going to become one of the most required and facility for the hematopathologist as well as the clinical hematologist to make important decisions. So here I have distributed my talk into these cross headings: a short introduction including the principle of flow cytometer, parts of the flow cytometer, a brief about the prerequisites and preparation before going into the analysis, approaches to analysis in various WBC disorders, examples of clinical applications by way of case studies, and along with limitations of the procedure. In between, I would also be referring to a few genetic tests which are relevant for each case study as we go on. So genetics and the flow cytometer based tests are now becoming essential to hematology practice. So I'd like to start with saying that all of us pathologists, the day we enter the pathology fraternity, we train our eyes to looking at cells, the shape, the size, the nucleus, cytoplasm of the cells through the microscope. So we see the cells in various media, in various tissues, in various biopsies, in various specimens. So as depicted in this picture, the same cell is occupying various tissues, varying in appearance, but they are all, we know that, normal benign mesothelial cell. So whenever we talk about cells, most of the times we try to see them from the point of view of the microscope. Flow cytometer looks at the cells with a different perspective. It's assisted by the technological advances and helps to fill the gap in the understanding of science, as well as many times helps in prognosis of the various diseases. However, there is no real-time morphological correlation here. So this is also, in a sense, we considered as cytology, study of cells, and devoid of the disturbing subjectivities which we go through when we see slides under the microscope, the differences that we encounter when two people see the same cell or same tissue under the microscope. And it has the virtue of quantification of the observations. But they speak the similar language, and now therefore it doesn't stop at the study, it actually goes on to measure what it studies. So therefore cytometry. So here the cells or the properties of cells or any particle for that matter are studied as they flow through a fluid suspension across an illuminated light. So this illuminated light actually interrogates the various properties of the cell. So this principle is a simple extension of the technology that we use in our new age cell counters. So the idea of interrogating the cells with light came from this gentleman, Wallace Coulter, who came up with what we now know as the Coulter principle, wherein the cell is allowed to pass through an aperture or a hole, on both sides of which there are different charges or two currents which are flowing. And the moment the cell passes through the hole, there is a event or there is a change in voltage which is recorded as a pulse. And this pulse is then summated and made into a complete histogram to give us the information of the complete cell population, the complete cell count. So this principle was basically for counting the cells and knowing just the size of the cells. So this is the format which I'm sure would have been dealt with in detail by the former speakers. So this was the format which came from the Coulter based machines. So as we moved on, we were more interested to know and count the other cells also, and we were trying to differentiate each and every cell and to differentiate rather automate the counting of each and every cell of the blood. So then came the technology of using laser lights instead of the arc lights which were used in the Coulter. So the laser light now was utilized to hit the particle as it passed through the path of the light, and the scatter of this light was then recorded as forward and the side scatter. So these were the two main scatters which were recorded. The forward scatter being proportional to the diameter or size of the particle or the cell is usually measured between 8 to 10 degrees in most of the flow cytometers, whereas the side scatter is measured at 90 degrees. So this gives basic information which divides the cells into these groups. So these are the histograms or the dot plots rather, which we see in our newer generation auto analyzers, which we use to do routine CBC tests. So this differentiates the cells further from the three peak or the 3-part histogram of the Coulter to a 5-part, and now we've graduated to 8 and then further and further on. So this is also the basic plot from which flow cytometric analysis starts. So it's important to understand this. So the smaller the cell, the smaller would be the forward scatter. The more complex, more granular, more convoluted the nucleus, it will have more side scatter. So the most scattered one would be from the most scattered light would emanate from the neutrophil and the least scattered from the lymphocyte. So that's about normal cell. So what do we do when we are trying to identify an abnormal cell which has probably lost its similarity to its normal counterpart, changed its shape, size or other features? Then we actually go on to take help from special stains or ancillary techniques. So the most widely applied ancillary technique nowadays, especially in histopathology, is immunohistochemistry, which also works on similar principle as flow cytometry, in which both these cases we try to demonstrate an antigen and antibody reaction and try to identify the particular cell. So here you see that the histopathology slide has CD10 being put up, and this is a case of follicular lymphoma. And similarly, the same sample minced suspension from the same node has been run on the flow cytometer. Here we could see the positivity for CD10 as well as CD20. So in immunohistochemistry, most of the times we are not able to go beyond using 2 antibodies, whereas in flow cytometry we are able to use 2, 3, 4 and so on and so forth. So the number of antibodies which we can apply depends upon the lasers you have within your flow cytometer, and if you have the most advanced, you can even go up to 20 antibodies. So this is the comparison between the two techniques utilizing similar principle. And moreover, the contrast in the population colors which we are able to put in a flow cytometry plot are appreciated better by the analyzer. Now, as we study cells, as I said, IHC is based on antigen and antibody reaction. So, just a minute to remember this gentleman, who's Albert Hewitt Coons, who first did his study on antibodies when he was doing his work on pneumococcal bacteria in 1940s. And another gentleman, Goldberg, who demonstrated first that antibodies could bind to antigen. And this is the basic principle of all the tests which are based on antigen and antibody reaction, including flow cytometry, immunohistochemistry, ELISA, and an array of other tests. So we all know that a single antibody can be expressed by various types of cells. For example, here I've shown CD34 positivity. This can be seen in a vascular cell. It can be seen in normal hematopoietic precursor. It can be seen in a blast of myeloid lineage or a blast of lymphoid lineage also. So now, differentiating these would require further interrogation with further antibodies. So a cell cannot be characterized by a single antibody interrogation. It needs more than 1, 2, or sometimes many antibodies to be applied. And if we could do that simultaneously at the same time, it would be of great help and saves a lot of time and resources. Now, during our routine work, I have found that most of the students understand the principle of flow cytometry well, but they're scared to analyze or start to look at the plots which come out of the instrument, probably because of lack of confidence on or not able to depend on the computer generated data, because most of the times we are depending upon our microscopes and seeing the immunohistochemistry. I would like to emphasize that both these techniques are similar. The way we see the cells getting stained by the brown IHC, it's the same that is happening in a flow cytometric run sample. But the only difference is that here the computation is better. Here we are able to analyze a large number of cells at the same time. So if we compare a routine CBC analyzer which analyzes around 50,000 cells in a sample, the flow cytometer can go up to 10 million, depending upon what is the precision that we require. So computing here definitely matters when we want to analyze a lot of cells and we want to pick up the smallest group of abnormal cells, which would be pertaining to different types of minimal residual disease analysis. So both these are very similar. We just have to understand the basic principle of the working of the instrument and the analysis of the systematic analysis of the samples. Now, one more word of caution, that flow cytometry cannot be and should not be done without a morphological diagnosis. We need to see all the smears and make a provisional diagnosis before going on and analyzing and confirming our findings on the system. Okay, So now, as I have been discussing, for interrogation of a cell, we need a system to identify the presence of a cell in the sample, so which is easy when we see under the microscope, but we could make it faster if the same thing could be done on an analyzer. Point one. And the next, we should be able to subcategorize the cell into whether it is normal or abnormal, and then go on to say or predict the lineage or the type of the cell. So where flow cytometry can do it in a faster way. So these are the normal hematopoietic cells which arise easily identified. So they differ in size, granularity and character, complexity. So therefore we are able to differentiate them well using a simple forward and side scatter as I've described. But now if we want to go on and study them in detail, one good method is to study the antigens present on each cell. Now, how to select the antigens? The antigen should be appropriate. These should be the antigen or the antibody panel should be pre-designed as soon as the experiment is designed. As in, when we decide that we are going to study hematopoietic cells, we should have a marker which separates the hematopoietic cells completely and very well from non-hematopoietic cells. Example, CD45, which is present in various amounts in different stages of maturing myeloid cells and is absent from, say, epithelial cells or metastatic cells, which can be completely separated by negative reaction in these cells. Also, this antigen should be specific for the specific type of cells we are wanting to see. Example, if you are wanting to do an exercise or an experiment on enumerating the lymphocytes, then we should first get all the lymphocytes out from our population, highlighted out from our population. That is, we put a CD45 master marker which separates all hematopoietic cells. From that, we should separate out the lymphocytes by looking at the 45 intensity, which is the maximum bright in the mature lymphocytes, and then go on to separate them using the various markers which are specific for B, T, NK or NKT, etc. So in this way, we can study the specific antigen and therefore specifically recognize these cells, and that also, if we are able to simultaneously stain or make the antigen and antibody reaction possible, all these antigen antibody reactions possible in a single suspension preparation, it would give us the report immediately. So now, as I've discussed, many techniques use antigen and antibody reaction to demonstrate the presence or absence of the antigen. So now, once we have prepared or got an antibody against the required antigen and we add it to the cell suspension, once the antigen antibody reaction takes place, it needs to be visualized. So fluorescence is the technique by which we visualize this reaction. So here in this cartoon, I have tried to show that when a laser hits a fluorochrome. So fluorochrome is a naturally fluorescent molecule that can also be synthesized artificially. So basically, when a laser hits the fluorochrome, the atoms in its orbit gets activated, they go into a higher energy state and they go into a higher orbit. So once that is done, and then at a later point of time, this atom comes back to its resting state, it then releases some amount of energy while going back to rest. So there is this excitation and emission process which is happening. So the laser excites this atom to go out into higher state, and then later it comes back and releases the extra energy, which is called the emission. So every fluorochrome has a excitation spectrum, which is a range of wavelength by which it gets excited, and a range of wavelength which it emits when it comes back to rest. So that's called the emission spectrum. So based on this fact, we have to conjugate, or we have to mix our fluorochromes with our antibodies and the laser. So this combination of the laser fluorochrome is the heart of the flow cytometer, and the light which is emitted out when the electron comes back to the atom comes back to the resting state is captured by the electronic system and then processed as signals in the form of histograms or dot plots. So this is another diagram to show the same process, the excitation and the emission. So there's this electron which is getting excited and then going out into the outer orbit and then coming back and releasing the lower energy photon. So till now we said we could categorize the cells of the blood into these 5 major categories depending upon the forward and the side scatter. So once we have this fluorescence with us, we could use this fluorescent dyes or fluorochromes to combine with various antibodies which could now get activated by various lasers, the number depending upon the capacity of our flow cytometer, and then we'll be able to analyze n number of antibodies on a single cell, so that we are very sure on the lineage of the cell. Now going on to prerequisites for flow cytometric analysis. So what samples could be used? It could be blood, bone marrow, any body fluid, piece material from solid organs also is acceptable. Everything should be in fluid state. We should have a pre-designed panel of antigens as I have discussed and the corresponding antibodies. Now the fluorochromes also should be matched to the laser, so you should know which laser we have and which all fluorochromes would match these lasers. So as in whether our lasers are able to excite the fluorochrome I'm buying to bind with my antibody. We need centrifuge because we need to lyse the solution, especially when we are dealing with WBC samples. We do not need any RBCs, they need to be lysed so that we get a nice pellet after we've centrifuged and removed the lysed RBCs. Apart from that, we need normal controls for every experiment so that we could comment on especially the absence of a particular antibody. So in the absence, when we are not using a normal control, it will be difficult to ascertain whether the absence is a true absence or it is due to a issue in our experiment. And of course, we need a flow cytometer. So we have various types of flow cytometers available, ranging from basic 4 laser to now around 12-15 lasers who can give you a lot of parameters. So suppose we have a 4 laser instrument, then we can use 4 antibodies plus 2 parameters, forward scatter and side scatter. So in turn, in a single tube, we'll be able to characterize 6 different characters of the cell that is constituent of the solution. Now coming to basics of the flow cytometer. So it has 3 parts: the fluidics, the optical system, the electronic system. So the fluidics basically is a further refinement of the technique which this is also used by the routine CPC analyzers, wherein there is this hydrodynamic focusing and laminar flow. As in, we have to introduce our samples into a system where there is a fluid which is moving at a very high pressure, so that these sample cells will automatically get aligned in a single stream, as you can see here. And this prevents the problems due to doublets or double cells or multiple cells entering the path of the light of interrogation, which was very common in the Coulter's initial instruments. So this ensures that the cells pass through in a single line, because we need information from single cell to be captured. So that is fluidics. So part of optics I've already discussed, which consists of the major part, forward and the side scatter. So this is another diagram depicting the same. And these two signals are collected separately by two separate detectors. Now further on the optics, these lasers, all the lasers that are available in the instrument would hit the path of these cells, which come in a single file one by one, and the information of light scatter from each laser is captured by a separate optical detector. So leading to this type of a scatter plot, which is very similar to our scatter plot seen in a CBC analyzer. This diagram further explains the arrangement of the various photodetectors, diodes and photomultiplier tubes, which help in getting all the information of the light scatter, and then this one conveys this data to the electronics part, which then converts the whole information into the various plots and histograms. So this is just an example of a photomultiplier tube, which is very efficient in collecting the side scatter data, whereas the photodiodes, they're better with the forward scatter signals. So now the electronics, as I said, gets into forming, collecting all the data and then making these types of graphs, histograms, plots for us to see. So now this is what I explained, that whenever two cells pass through, the information is wrong regarding the intensity, regarding the size or the fluorescence information. So always they should be in single file. So now these are the various methods of data representation. So we have seen more commonly the scatterograms and the histograms. These are the contour plots. Here, the center part of these worlds would be the area where the antigen is maximally present. So the maximum density of the antigen is the central part of this concentric circles. Then you have histograms and density plots. And these it also needs to be emphasized here that the scales that we use for these histograms are not same as our CBC histograms. Most of the times when we use a fluorescent tagged antibody, we use a log or log linear scales. This is because the antigen expression over the various over the span of cells may vary from negative to very bright. So to cover the whole spectrum, it is not possible if we have a linear scale to cover whole of it. So therefore, it's always considered better to have a log or a log linear scale. So this again the emitted signal. Now let's see. So this is a So in a single tube, when we are to start the experiment, we have to take the cell pellet, we should lyse the RBCs and then add the antigen tagged antibody, the antibody, the fluorochrome and the cell which has the antigen into a single tube. And then we incubate it for some time so that the reaction takes place. This is a list of the commonly used fluorochromes. And on the side I've mentioned the lasers which activate these fluorochromes. So of these, the APC and the FITC are the dimmer ones. PE, PerCP are the brighter ones. So when we want to analyze the antigens, we would prefer using a brighter fluorochrome for those antigens which are sparsely distributed on a cell. Example, CD34 in an acute leukemia experiment. Whereas I would use a dim fluorochrome when I want to analyze an antigen which is densely present. So this is how you decide how to which fluorochrome to combine with which antibody. So if your antibody is less in number, you give it a brighter fluorochrome. If the antibody is denser, you give it a dimmer fluorochrome. And these are the emission maximum emission wavelengths which are mentioned on the right side. So this is the same. So you have this fluorescence as a visualization system in this. So now, as we have tagged in the tube, the cell with the antigen, antibody with the fluorescence, this goes into the tube and generates this type of a data, which is single parameter histogram, which shows that this particular antigen, which is X, is negative on the small population, and this particular antigen X is positive on this population, and the intensity of positivity is corresponding to the height. Now, as we discussed some time before, just one antibody interrogation is not enough to identify the cell precisely. We may need more than 1, 2 or 3 antibody. So we may have to add more antibodies. So as we have seen, we can tag the antigen with the antibody, which is in turn attached to the fluorochrome, and we can change the number of antigens and the fluorochromes, and the type of antigen also can be changed with the help of a different set of antibody and fluorescent dye or fluorochrome. So each one, signal from each one will be picked up by a different detector. So this figure demonstrates the 2 different type of fluorochromes, the different in color, which are going to bind to 2 different antigens on the surface of the cell, and these fluorochromes are bound to 2 different antibodies also. And this is the emission spectra again of the fluorochrome. Now, as I said, now when we try to sequentially tag the cell with different antibodies. So here I tagged the first antibody with the first fluorochrome. Then I went on to add the second antibody with the second fluorochrome. And then finally I did the same with the third antibody on the same cell. So herein, the first antibody signal goes to the detector 1, and the next one goes to detector 2, and then the same happens with the last detector, which takes up the third antibody fluorescent signal. So herein, each and every information of this single cell regarding its reaction to each and every antibody is separately captured and then processed and depicted to the person who is analyzing the result. So this, for a break, this is a timeline of the history of our viewing of the cell, starting from light microscopy to the era of fluorescent assisted cell study, which started around 1970. And a minute to remember these two gentlemen also, Leonard Heidelberg, who was an immunologist and he constructed the first flow cytometer, and Wolfgang Godet, who was the one who started the first clinical application by doing the CD4/8 analysis in HIV/AIDS patients in Africa. So now going on to the applications of flow cytometry. Of course, all of us know that acute leukemia diagnosis is the most widely used application. Along with that, it can also be utilized for residual disease analysis, which helps us in finding out very small clones when they relapse. They also help us in diagnosing lymphoproliferative disorders, the lymphomas, separating it from reactive hyperplasias or reactive increase in lymphocytes, myelodysplastic syndromes, chronic myeloproliferative neoplasms, especially to indicate whether they are in progression, immunodeficiency disorders, stem cell enumeration, PNH, and then the list goes on. So now preparation which is required in a WBC experiment, as I said, is to exclude the RBCs, decide the antibody panel. Now if you're wanting to do acute leukemia experiment to find out whether there are blasts in the sample, then the antibodies which we choose should first define the blast. They should have immaturity associated markers. These should be immaturity associated markers. Example, CD34. Also, it should have basic markers to separate non-hematopoietic from hematopoietic cells, and also antigens which we could use to subcategorize the blasts as myeloid, lymphoid, of the lymphoid T or B, because the treatment modalities vary in each of them. And we should decide on which fluorescent molecule we need to tag, because if we make a wrong antibody fluorescent combination, your information may be either the fluorescence may be low, very low, undetectable, may become negative, or it may become very bright when the actual presence of the antigen is low. Now, as far as hematopoietic cells are concerned, the CD45 is known as the master antigen, which is expressed on all leukocytes in variable amounts. And this is a prepared pellet. So on the left side is a good pellet, on the right side is a contaminated pellet. So now we go on to see how to analyze the samples. Now we have separated, decided on panel, fluorescent tags done. Now let me simplify the findings on a 2D histogram examples. So in a histogram, we can divide it into 4 quadrants, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can see that there are variable numbers of cells in all these quadrants. We move on. Now we apply a single antibody CD45 and compare it with the site scatter properties of each of these cells. So as we see, this population of cell has a very high CD45 and a very high site scatter also. So this probably highest site scatter is for neutrophils. So possibly this is a neutrophilic CD cells. Now again going on, interpreting the histogram is based on these dividers that we use on the histogram. So these are indicators of positive or negative control points. So herein we see that the quadrant 1, the upper left has been assigned as X negative and Y positive. That means this parameter is positive and this parameter here would be negative. Similarly, as we move from to the next quadrants, the positivities vary. And these positivities are assigned according to the normal controls that we use, which determine the actual cutoff points. As in, a normal positive control of X antigen would determine the minimal positivity which is required for this antigen, and the normal cell which expresses Y will determine the minimal positivity for this antigen. And therefore, this cutoff is set after seeing the positivity in a normal population. And also, we can utilize the absence of markers. Say, for example, MPO would be absent in lymphoid cells. So this can be used as a negative control. So controls are important in setting up these quadrant dividers also. So we can therefore enumerate each number of cell in each quadrant. So this is a better histogram which says that this has a particular antigen negative and a particular antigen positive. This one has, this quadrant always has both antigens positive. This quadrant has only the x-axis antigen positive, and this quadrant always has both negative. So this is the basic principle which we have to remember, that the upper left quadrant will have Y antigen positive, whereas the lower right will have the X antigen positive. The upper right will have both positive and lower left will have both negative antigens. So this is depicting the same. So we can actually count the numbers of cells which are here called events. So the number of dots that we get are not equal to the cells, because there may be multiple cells behind these cells which we are not able to see in a 2D histogram. So these are therefore called events and not cells. So now, in a normal population, we can differentiate site scatter and 45, and we know that maximum CD45 present on lymphocytes, so they are the most bright ones, and then a little less 45 or monocytes, they have more site scatter than lymphocytes, so they are upper, and the highest position is for neutrophils, which are 45 as well as site scatter. So that's about the normal cell. So now if I want to analyze a sample for presence of blast, then I have these normals set up. So I also have the master marker, which is CD45, which differentiates a non-hematopoietic cell from the hematopoietic cell. And then I prepare different tubes which have each of these antibodies. So all the B markers are combined together. So it depends upon your flow cytometer, whether you can use 4 or 5 or 6 antibodies of the same lineage in a single tube. So each tube is analyzed separately, mixed with a sample pellet, and then incubated and then run on the flow cytometer. The panels could be generated or can be worked out using guidelines. In our center, we use the Euroflow guidelines. It's also important to have controls for each experiment. So these are the common fluorochromes that we use. So coming to reading the plots. So now I have this 45 bright population as before. I put MPO. I mark out this MPO so that this comes out of the complete population. In the further plots, I will see only this gated or marked population. I will not see this or this population. So this process is called gating or selection of cells of our interest. So as you saw, when we gated the MPO positive cells, these cells were not seen, they were unstained. So now I've just removed the barriers, and so these are still there, but they were not depicted before because we gated or selected the population of interest. Now similarly, if I go on and gate the lymphocyte here and then apply CD20 and CD3, then I will see this population separate into two different types of cells, and I'm not seeing this MPO positive neutrophils anymore. So they are hidden here because I have not selected them. So they are here, they were very much here, but they were hidden. So now going on to some scenarios with this background. 30-year-old male who's a known case of HIV/AIDS now presents to clinic with recurrent sinusitis. He is advised flow cytometry for CD4 and 8 enumeration. So first we go on to do a 45 which chooses our population. So this 45 is very bright in the lymphocytes as compared to the neutrophils and monocytes. And then I get the next set of cells with CD3 because I want the two types of CD3 cells, CD4 and 8, to be depicted. So once CD3 positive cells are selected, I go on to the next sequential staining of CD4 and 8, which separates this population and this population and also gives me the percentage and the number of cells in each group. So I put 45, CD3, CD4 and 8 in my same tube. But I have to be careful, I should not be overlapping the fluorochromes. Now the second scenario where the clinician asks, is this acute leukemia? I see these type of cells in the marrow or peripheral blood. I know these are big cells looking immature, blasts, but I don't see all rods. MPO is negative, PS, NSC also are negative. So now I go by the algorithm of using CD45 master marker. Then I use immaturity marker. Also use corresponding mature cell markers, lineage specific markers, and also prognostic markers wherever I would require. So now if I combine CD34 immaturity marker with MPO, I'm going to highlight the myeloblast. Whereas if I combine CD34 with the CD19 antibody, then I'm going to get a highlighted lymphoblast, B lymphoblast. And if I do that, same with the CD3 combination with CD34, then I get T lymphoblast. So this is how it goes on. So there are also intermediate cells which come between the mature and the immature blast, which are the normal progenitor cells, especially important in B progenitor cells, which are called hematogones. So we differentiate them by looking at the type of cell grouping. So in a blast or a normal collection of precursor cells, they would always be in a cluster. That means the population shows similar intensity of positivity for the antigen that we are investigating. Whereas in a developing progenitor, the progenitor will have variable intensity. That means at different stages of maturation, it loses some of the antigens and gains some other antigens. So it would ultimately gain all the mature cell antigens, but in the interim period, they may look like a blast. So this also similar way. Now here selection of, if we want to select and study the monocytic cells, we should be careful. If we are dealing with monocytic leukemia, we may have to use specific monocytic immature cell marker like CD64. So what about the selection of blasts before we actually start putting the antibodies? So when we are looking for blast, we look for this area which is CD45-DIM. So all the precursor cells or the immature cells of hematopoietic cells have low number of 45, even though they are not negative. But we have to remember that in this area, which is called the blast hole or the progenitor area, also contains platelets, plasma cells, mast cells, plasmacytic dendritic cells, as well as basophils along with the blast. Now, a word about backgating. We've seen sequential forward gating. There's also something which is called backgating, which we can trace the last applied antigen back to the initial site scatter or any other plot, which is also sometimes helpful. Now, next scenario is a small child who comes with a strep pneumonia and has got low HB and a borderline platelet, but has leukoerythroblastic picture. His marrow is packed with blasts, but again, his special stains I tried to do are negative. So the question is, flow cytometry negative required. So is the FCM required here? Yes. So before running, I set up my tubes, and also we need to set up an unstained tube. I'll come to it later. So here is the B cell tube of this patient. We can see that the CD34 is positive, which is an immature cell marker. We've already identified the blast hole cells. These are the large number of cells that are present in the blast area or the progenitor area. And these are positive CD34 as well as CD19, which is a marker of B cell lineage. So these worksheets that I'm showing you are the actual worksheets on which we work, and you just need to concentrate on the highlighted plots. So these are all plots which are there in most worksheets, so that you get both the positive, negative, normal control as well as your sample on the same page. So now going on, this also shows positivity for CD10. However, CD20, which is a marker of mature cell, is negative. So this is again a T tube. Here you can see that none of the quadrants are showing any positivity with respect to this pink population, which is the blast population. So here, how do we enumerate our findings? So this is a single plot which shows the blast cells present in the progenitor area. Out of this whole blast cells, this is the percentage of CD34 positive cells. So even if the number is less here, it will be taken as positive for CD34. So this total positivity comes here, designated as blast, and out of those, 34 positive is designated here, and all the statistical details are provided here, which can be recorded. So this is quantification of the data. So now going on to the lineage tube or the cytoplasmic tube, which is important because the surface markers, they sometimes on the surface aberrant markers can be expressed, which are aberrant for a particular lineage. So we depend more on the cytoplasmic markers, wherein you permeate the cytoplasm, permeate the cell membrane and go into the cytoplasm, and then allow antigen antibody reaction to take place within them. So in this case, there is this small CD79A positivity, which is specific for B cell. So the diagnosis here is B-ALL. Coming on to another case, 78-year-old lady presents with pancytopenia. She's got no blasts on peripheral smear. However, bone marrow appears dilute and has got 15% blasts, but they have few of them having rods. So now, should I do a flow cytometry? Here, yes, definitely, because the criteria is not satisfied on manual count, not reaching 20%. I would give importance to the myeloid tube. But should I also do this? I'll come back to it in a minute. So this is the initial blast population. So this 45 delineates the mature cells which have high CD45 positivity from the blasts or progenitors which have low CD45 positivity. And then further, we have gated this population now, and now on we'll see only these pink cells in all the following plots. So these pink cells are now positive for 34 as well as 117. So 117 is a immaturity cell marker of myeloid lineage. So you have 34 and another immature marker which is 117. So here another antigen you can see positive is the CD33 as well as CD13. So these here I've highlighted the normal neutrophils with very few cells expressing 1-1 positivity here. So this is the MPO positivity of normal neutrophils which are designated as blue and the lymphocytes as red. So diagnosis is acute myeloid leukemia. So this slide shows in short about how to decide on dim, moderate and bright signals. So the bright signals are always most of the time designated whenever the fluorescent intensity is more or equal to or more than 10⁴. Dim intensity is whenever it is between 0 to 10⁵, and anything that comes in between is called as moderate intensity. Another case, 56-year-old man with gum hyperplasia, WBC count being high and the platelet low. You have this typical morphology of large cells with cleaved nuclei. You go on to the bead tube. So I go to the blast area. To my surprise, there are no cells in the blast area. Now, when I carefully look at it, there is a population of cell, a dense population which is sitting here. This is the monocytic region. So all the abnormal cells have come to the monocytic area. And further, when blood marker, I find that there are some cells which are CD13 positive, which is a typical myeloid or a neutrophilic series marker, as well as it is positive for CD64, which is the monocytic immature marker. So this marks an immature monocytic cell. So sometimes you may also see a case like this. Here the yellow population is that of a monocyte and the pink population is M4, a combination of both myeloblast and monoblast. So this is AML with monocytic differentiation. So here highlighting that CD34 most of the times may not be consistent. We may have to use CD64 with preferably a mature monocytic marker like CD14 to categorize the monocytic leukemia. So this slide to highlight the normal population which I have shown in all the worksheets. Compare them, the positive and the negative controls can be immediately made out. And also a word of is essential in providing good reports. Going on to another patient who is young, got bicytopenia and also has PT and APDT prolongation. His bone marrow showed this typical hypergranular cells with a lot of phagocytes. You all understand these are consistent with APML cells. We run the flow which shows good positivity for CD13, which is a neutrophilic marker, and also has got good MPO. However, when we look at the CD45 plot, there are hardly any much cells in the blast hole. Rather, most of the cells are actually going up because they have a high side scatter. So whenever we get something which we suspect as APML, do not get in the blast hole or the progenitor area go on to the high side scatter, extended to the high side scatter area. So in this case, it's not complete without the genetic evaluation. Here there is this abnormality, translocation 1517, which has to come along with the morphological and flow cytometric parameters. Here highlighting that in APML, CD34 as well as HLA-DR, both of these immaturity markers are negative. So this is the fish of the same patient, which shows that there is a fusion of the two chromosomes. One normal copies are depicted by a red color and the other normal copy by a green color. Both are fused and they are forming yellow signals. So important to recognize APML because the treatment modalities are different. Another person who's been diagnosed with 25% blasts in peripheral blood, this got nice long OR rods, multiple. Is it required flow cytometry? Let's see. So this person has got blasts, cells which are positive for myeloid immaturity marker 117 as well as CD13, but has got very less CD34 cells. But when I go to the bead tube, I find that there are some cells which are also positive for CD19. So this is a case of AML with aberrant CD19, which is typical of translocation 821. So FCM is important because this entity has got good prognosis provided there is no CD117 mutation of the gene, and CD56 is negative. Going on to another person who's old and comes to cardiology and gets the smear done, which shows a lot of blasts with this typical morphology, and the blasts are MPO strong. And this is the flow cytometric plots. I'm sorry, they're a little hazy, but I can tell you these are positive for 117 and CD33 here. However, in this case, also CD34 is negative and HLA-DR was also negative. However, this doesn't mean that this is APML. This rather would fit in for an AML with NPM1 mutation. So both of them have similar FCM patterns. So it's important to analyze each and every part of the investigation. The morphology, the clinical picture, the flow cytometry have to be all taken together. So this is in the end multi-parameter flow cytometry, multicolor flow cytometry with genetic analysis completing the case. So this is an algorithm which depicts dealing with AML with genetic aberrations. Another common aberration is CD7, which also has a poor prognostic indication. Going on to a child who is a known Down syndrome, has got blasts in the blood. She's also got some markers 117 as well as 13 positive, whereas it is negative for MPO. So these cells, these blasts are there in the 45 dim extending to the monocytic area also. So these blasts were seen to be positive for CD61, which is a marker of megakaryoblast. So this is AML M7, which is common in Down syndrome patients. Another one who's got large suspicious cells in the peripheral blood, has high LDH and the bone marrow done. Here, these are the blasts in the progenitor area, has got CD19 as well as CD10 positivity indicative of B cell lineage. However, in the myeloid tube, I find that many cells are positive for CD13, which indicates that this possibly is a case of ALL with Philadelphia chromosome or translocation 922 positive. Important to know because it's got a targeted therapy available. Sorry. So here also So these are the list of genetic aberrations associated with BALS. So most of the aberrations carry a poor prognosis except the 1281 and 119 translocation. So important to indicate whenever possible the type of aberrations which could be tested for. So this another case, 7-year-old boy who had a mediastinal mass and had difficulty in breathing. So his plot showed this blast cells in the CD45 dim area, which were CD34 positive, and further showed all T cell markers, CD7, CD2, CD99, and CD5, CD3, all were positive. And also cytoplasmic marker, cytoplasmic CD3 was also positive, confirming the T lineage. Important to know because TALLs behave in a much worse manner compared to BALs. Another child who came with huge spleen and had these types of cells which look like blasts. However, the flow cytometry did not show a cluster of cells. It showed a patterned appearance. So this is the waterfall pattern that you typically see in hematobones. So this child actually had Gaucher's disease and had reactive increase in hematobones. So this is the maturation pattern of the B cell progenitors. This another picture from the typical blast in a child, 16-year-old. This blast atypical cells have got cytoplasmic vacuoles, and the flow plots show a very bright, a very bright 10 and 38 positivity, which is also accompanied by a good 20 positivity, which is unusual in ALS. So went on to do clonality, so clonal population, indicating that these all were Burkitt lymphoma cells. So this is the fish picture which shows translocation of 8 male who had anemia, long-standing duration, and his bone marrow showed all these dyspoietic cells. We ran the flow cytometer experiment. So the clinical question being, is it MDS? Is there an evidence of clonality? Is it high or low risk? So this was the flow plot of this lady who had blasts in the progenitor area and they were 34 positive. So this was a higher risk category. So therefore, computing could be done better than compared to a manual count. So these are all the abnormalities commonly encountered in MDS. In our patient, she had this 7q abnormality and elaboration patterns in the myelodysplastic syndrome whenever we suspect a myelodysplastic syndrome. So which is more helpful in the low grade ones also. So this is the patient who is on imatinib, known CML. Clinical question is whether it's a relapse because he is having increasing splenomegaly now. So in his flow plots, we can see that again, these immature markers are positive along with CD13, which is a neutrophilic marker, and as well as CD117, indicative of a relapse in a known CML. Next scenario is that of various chronic lymphoproliferative disorders. So here, instead of looking at immature cells or 45 dim cells, we would first get the cells which are bright CD45 and then subclassify them as T, B or NK, in which we would then gate a second time with CD19 or CD3 positive cells. So it's more useful in low-grade lymphomas for staging of lymphomas, and it's got good specificity for CLL as well as hairy cell leukemias. So this is a person who's old, cells in her peripheral blood, the soccer ball appearance. So this we started gating 45, then he came to CD19 in the B tube. So these cells are 20 positive as well as 5 positive and 23 positive. So any mature B cell which is 19, 20, 5 and 23 positive and has a dim clonality, you can't make out the difference between these. This is kappa and this is lambda. Much of a difference not made out between the two. It indicates a case of CLL. This also has other markers like co-expression of 243 and expression of CD38, absence of FMC7, which is an epitope on CD20. This is a T tube which looks quite clean. There's not much material. These are all normal lymphocytes. So CLLs are also associated with genetic abnormalities. So it's important to get this information also on hand because many of them are associated with prognostic significance. Here just a mention about monoclonal B cell lymphocytosis, which is a precursor of CLL and can show the similar findings on morphology as well as flow cytometry. So this shows the difference between mantle cell as well as CLL, wherein the mantle cell is only positive for CD5 and CLL is positive for both CD5 and 23. So this is from a elderly patient who's got dragging sensation in the abdomen with huge splenomegaly, and these are the typical hairy cells present in the peripheral blood. So these cells are again B cells which express bright CD45, 20 positive, and they also express markers like CD11C, 103, and they should ideally express CD123 also. So herein we have a B cell population which has 11C, 103, 25 and negative 123. So the differential on morphology was hairy cell leukemia or hairy cell leukemia variant. So in view of the 123 negative picture, we thought it would be in favor of hairy cell variant or SMZL bar SLVL, which is splenic marginal zone lymphoma or splenic lymphoma with villous lymphocytes. So this is another flow from a patient who is a known grade 2 follicular lymphoma. This was actually an aspirate from the lymph node, which shows that there is a 19 positive population, but this has got a big scatter, side scatter, and this has lambda clonality also, and there is no, these are the normal CD3 positive cells. So this also happens to be BCL2 positive. So this is a large cell lymphoma which got a higher scatter and size and complexity suggestive of relapse. Next is a person who came for anemia evaluation, has got a few plasma cells in his marrow. So here FCM is required to establish the clonality of these cells. So these plasma cells are acquired from CD45 dim area as compared to other mature lymphocytes because these fall in the same gate as the blast, and then they are delineated using 138 and 38 positive population, and then we see we see for the clonality. So here clearly it is kappa clonal. So it's a clonal plasma cell population indicative of malignant plasma cells. So coming to the final case, this is a cutaneous T-cell lymphoma, known case of Sézary syndrome. So this shows clearly that these cells are CD3 positive and CD4 positive and negative for CD8. So this could be also used for minimal residual disease of all nature. So this is a MRD plot which is much more crowded than a usual worksheet. So we have to search. So that's because there are a lot of data, large number of cells, much larger number of cells have to be analyzed. And this gate is a time gate which is present in all worksheets. So this gives an idea whether there was any interruption in the flow of the samples. So this also needs to be monitored, and this also acts as a quality control point. Another application of flow cytometry is CD34 enumeration. Yet another one is PNH clone evaluation. So we look for loss of GPI linked proteins. So most of us would look for CD55, CD59, CD14 or CD24. So the loss of GPI linked proteins is analyzed. DNA ploidy for various neoplasms, especially for ALLs, is important because hypodiploid is bad. So coming to the challenges and issues. So sample issues are, we need good samples in good state. Storage should not go beyond 24 hours. Never see the plots without evaluating the morphology. Quality control is extremely important. Instrument maintenance is strictly required. All antibodies need to be titrated for every batch. The cocktails or the mixtures of antibodies, if we use them, also needs to be properly titrated. Limitations being that it's not morphology independent. Classification, a complete classification of lymphoproliferative disorders like large cell lymphomas may be not completely possible on FCM alone. And many times this requires genetic correlation, like in a case of APML, and in a solid sample from a solid tissue needs to be minced nicely and made into a suspension. So that's all. Thank you for your attention.